I was up in Northern Ireland this last week and had the honor of speaking to a group of people about relationships and communication. First, let me say thank you to the lovely people of Donamana, Londonderry, and the surrounding areas for having me as a guest lecturer. I really enjoyed my time in your homes, your churches, your cafes, and just meeting everybody in general. If you ever want to go up to Northern Ireland, I highly recommend it. You won't find a group of people up there that are nicer, kinder, or more generous than the North Irish. And while I was up there, I was reminded of a fact that at our very core, we are relational beings. No matter where we go, people are bound by their relationships. And to me, with that comes three indisputable facts. First, we are not separate from our relationships. Second, we suffer, get hurt, and sustain trauma through our relationships. And finally, we are healed by having new relationships. Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host. And as a therapist, I've spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their traumas so they can repair ruptures, heal their wounds, and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned in the opening, I believe there are three indisputable facts about our relational nature. As I mentioned, I was up in Northern Ireland, and what I realized in talking to the great folks up there is that they struggle with the same things we struggle. And even though they're a continent away, even though I don't understand all the nuances of their culture, they speak with different accents, so on and so forth. It just reminded me how we can get sort of locked in our own little bubble and forget that the world over, everybody's sort of still struggling with the same things. And that is, how do we have relationships that bring us peace, that bring us joy, that allow us to actualize our own best self, if you want to say it that way? How do we have relationships that bring out the best in us, that lift us up, that challenge us to be better than we are? I think those are things fundamentally that we all want from our relationships. And so, as I said at the outset of this podcast, I want to talk about three facts today. And fact number one is that we are not separate from our relationships. Now, I'm not saying we don't have our own experiences or our own thoughts or our own feelings. And while it is true nobody can literally inhabit our bodies, they can't stand in our own skin, so to speak, the fact still remains that all our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are intricately interwoven in and through our relationships, past and present. And I think we have done so much better in terms of our science and our understanding in learning that we're not separate, and the goal of development is not to stand on our own, to be our own man or our own woman, and somehow be our own island that is unaffected by those around us. Used to be the goal of development, this was back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, was very much the idea that we need to learn how to individuate. We shouldn't be emotionally reactive to others. We should be able to sort of, regulate our own emotions, never feel the impact. Stoicism was very much along these same lines. Let's not react emotionally. Let's live logically in our head. And I think what we've learned through science and through better science even, and through the last 50, 60, 70 years is that's just not possible. We are relational beings at our very core. Embedded deep in the cells of our bodies is a relationship. And we only know ourselves through others and through our relationships, past and present. I think sometimes, like, I think about this like maybe the roots of a tree that are unseen, and yet they provide the essential support and a nourishment for the entire tree. Sometimes we focus on just what we're thinking or what's happening with us in the moment. And we often don't recognize the deep roots that run to our past and to our past experiences that actually can shape, or at the very least act as a lens through which we are interacting with others. And so I often see this when I'm working with a patient or a couple as well. I will ask them to imagine that a part of them is a protector that guards their trauma. And then I will ask them to understand what is the fear behind the protector. What's the purpose and function of that protector? Because he is, or she, if it's a woman, is protecting something. And so what is the fear behind there? And they can usually always point to a wound or a trauma that they sustain from somebody else. And usually this trauma carries the voice of the traumatizer. You're stupid, lazy, unlovable, unworthy, so on and so forth. And so being able to recognize those deep wounds and how they play a role in how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about the world, how we feel about others, that oftentimes those wounds can be the ones driving the bus, but we've built layers of protection and we often just don't realize it. So recognizing that from the cradle to the grave, our very existence is wrapped up in relationships. We can't stand outside of relationships and build our own identity, whether it's through our profession or it's in our personal life. It is intricately interwoven with others. So point number 2, because of the relational nature of our very existence, it also means that we at some point will suffer from the attachment wounds or traumas at the hands of others. We bear the scars of ruptures that are unrepaired, failures of caregiving, neglect, abuse, and of course the intergenerational nature of those failures that have been passed down to us. Within all of us are the wounds that carry the abandonment, fear, pain, rejection, shame, and alienation by others which have left their mark. This, I believe, is another indisputable fact about relationships. I don't think anybody gets out of this life without suffering some kind of wound from a relationship, whether it's a first marriage that has gone wrong or multiple marriages that have gone wrong, whether it's a mother or a father that was incapable of providing the things that we needed, the emotional nourishment to help us grow, and we had to learn to adapt and we bear those scars, or any other kind of trauma that we might suffer through our relationships. I don't believe anybody comes out of this life without some kind of scar. And so I tend to think about this like a tree that may bear a scar, but then the tree learns to develop and grow around that scar. So while it still bears the mark, it has learned to adapt and it has learned to adjust. And so maybe sometimes you can see the bark start to cover that scar and the wound, or maybe it starts to lean away from a fence or another larger tree because it has to have room to grow, but by doing so, you're going to have a tree that leans and is not straight. Either way, this tree is learning to adapt to that scar or that wound. A little bit like a broken leg as well. When we have a broken leg, it can be repaired, and oftentimes when it is repaired, the bone actually gets stronger from the injury than it was before. And so even though the wound is still there, we can see the mark under an x-ray. In many ways, that bone can heal and come back stronger than it was. And so an indisputable fact about being interwoven in relationships to our very core means that at some point we bear the scars of relationships gone wrong, of unrepaired ruptures. And I think that's just sort of an indisputable fact in my opinion. Which then, of course, leads us to fact number 3, which is because we bear the scars of imperfect relationships, we also have the capacity to heal those scars by creating healing relationships. What gets broken in relationship gets healed through relationship, but the right kind of a relationship. Imagine yourself as a beautiful mosaic that has been shattered, and the pieces are all there, but they're scattered and disconnected on the floor. A new relationship can be like the careful hands that pick up those pieces. They understand where they fit, and slowly but surely they begin to put you back together. With each connection, you become more whole, and overall then the picture of who you are begins to emerge. Your mosaic, even though it bears the scars of those broken pieces, can be put back together so that you can begin to recognize who you are and others can begin to recognize you as well. I know that with people that have suffered serious traumas at the hands of others, and by hands I don't mean always physical abuse, I just mean through others, other early relationships, they've used that metaphor. They feel like they've been broken into 1,000 pieces at times, and they're slowly learning to put themselves back together. But they're not doing it alone. The myth that somehow they go up to the mountaintop and they contemplate and they find the truth and then they ascend back down this whole person is just that. It's a myth. That's not how we heal. We heal through healing relationships, which means we have to learn how to attract the right people that can help put us back together after we've suffered trauma in other relationships. And of course, that becomes part of the difficulty because we know trauma disrupts relationships. It disrupts the ability to be able to attract and sustain new and better relationships. But when we find others, when we're able to attract and attach ourselves to more healing relationships, then that has all the potential inherent in it for us to be able to heal. Research shows that if somebody has an insecure attachment style and they marry somebody with a secure attachment style, that over time they can move from an insecure to a more secure style of attachment. Now, that might surprise you, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it is born out of research, and I will absolutely say it is born out of my clinical work as well. I see people begin to feel themselves put back together. The bones begin to heal where they were once broken. The mosaic begins to take shape, and you begin to see the beautiful picture of what that person once was, because they now have somebody that is providing for them the things that they were unable to get in previous relationships, that left the scars of hurt and pain and the layers of protection and adaptation are no longer necessary in these new relationships. And so those are 3 indisputable facts, in my opinion, that I was reminded of recently. And I just wanted to share that with you because while this isn't sort of ground level stuff we're talking about today about how do I heal my trauma, how do I have better relationships, I do think sometimes pulling back and remembering that we're all in the same boat. Every single one of us is in the same boat. And sometimes it feels like we're rowing in different directions, but whether we're making a lot of progress that day on the high seas or not, we are still all in this together. Every single one of us, myself included. And because of that, we should take heart that we're all, at least in part, having similar experiences about what it means to be a human being on the face of this earth at this point in time. And there's many challenges and there's many ways that I think we go wrong, but there's also some beautiful things about life as well. One of the pleasures I have, and I'll just close with this story, is we did some home visits to some folks up there in Northern Ireland, and I went with one gentleman who was there last year and was able to visit a woman in her home. And so I went with him to go visit this time, even though I had never met her myself. And what joy it was for me to sit and watch them reconnect. When she saw him, she just lit up like a firework, and she was so happy. And she said, "I never thought I would see you again." And they hugged and they embraced and they sat and they shared stories and pictures with each other. And to me, what was happening there was far more important than any of the stories or the words they were saying to each other. That the connection that they were reestablishing was a healing connection for both of them. And at least for a little while, they were both putting themselves back together and renewing a relationship. And I just have to tell you, it was an absolute joy and a gift to watch, in my opinion, these two people that weren't sure they would ever see each other again, but then a year later were able to reunite and were able to create that same bond that they had had last year. That, to me, is the power of relationships, of healthy, healing relationships. When we see somebody that we haven't seen for a long time and they lift us up and they provide a healing antidote to us and help us mend in places, and we feel like we can pick right back up where we left off. Maybe you have somebody in your life like that you don't see very often, but when you do, it's like no time has passed. Those, to me, are healing relationships that get internalized and that help us grow and heal and transform from the broken places that so often can weigh us down. I want to thank you all very much for listening. As always, it's an absolute pleasure. Please make sure that you follow the podcast wherever you're listening, wherever you're streaming. I would love for you guys to click and like or follow whatever is appropriate for whatever platform you're on. Again, we come to you with new episodes every single week. Be sure and reach out. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you might want to hear differently. But as always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.